There are two extremely common articulation issues that I'd like to demonstrate for you that I think you can fix very easily. And if you're listening for these early on with your saxophone students, it'll allow you to fix them before they become a habitual type behavior with their saxophone playing. So the first one that I'm going to demonstrate sounds like this. You can hear it's a harsh burst at the beginning of the sound, and if I were to try to do it faster, you would see that it's extremely difficult to control at a faster tempo, and in fact impossible to execute. What's happening when the students do that is there's too much tongue touching the reed. And what I mean by that is if this hand is the mouthpiece and this hand is my tongue, they're using an amount of tongue like that on the reed. So they're using someplace in the back of their tongue or middle of the tongue even to touch the reed. What we want to try to encourage students to do is to use just back from the tip of their tongue. You definitely want to be past the tip of the tongue, not like that, but certainly not there. Somewhere closer to the tip is going to be where you want them to be. The easiest way that I've found to deal with this in teaching is something that I just call an extreme legato exercise. And what we do with this is you touch the tongue to the reed, but try to keep the air going and use just as light a touch as you can on the reed. And the students will find that that's much easier to do closer to the tip. So let me demonstrate that for you. If you use the wrong place on your tongue to articulate, you won't be able to do that exercise. The same is true if you use too much pressure with your tongue. It stops the sound completely, which is something that we really don't want to think about doing. We want to keep the air moving and really think about that T sound, which is not the very front of your tongue, but just a little bit back from it, touching the reed, and that fixes that problem very quickly. It's not an easy exercise to do. That may be something they struggle with a lot, but if you really encourage them to try to touch their tongue to the reed, but keep the sound going, that will fix that really funky tongue that we hear so often at a saxophonist. Another problem, sort of the opposite of that problem, that is a really, really common one with young saxophonists, is using the tip of the tongue. So if this is the mouthpiece and this is the reed, you'll see this kind of motion where the tip of the tongue actually touches the aperture between the reed and the mouthpiece. This creates, it's not a noticeably just horrible articulation until you start to speed it up, and then it's impossible to do really at any speed. It doesn't sound as crisp as a good articulation. I'll just demonstrate that for you now. A lot of what we use our tongue for on the saxophone is to create the appropriate amount of pressure for the air and to make a good sound. And you can hear the sound there was really thin. That's because in order to get your tongue working like that, the rest of your embouchure really has to do some strange things. So getting this kind of behavior with the tongue is something we really want to listen for. And the students may not even be aware of what part of their tongue they're touching. So you should probably proactively explain to them by pictures or use of hands that it's not the tip of the tongue, but it's like this. The tongue goes underneath the reed. I've had students do all sorts of strange things with their tongue. And once they start doing it, it's very difficult to get them to change that behavior because it becomes habitual incredibly quickly. So if you hear a thin sound with a really very strange and kind of buzzy and unclear articulation, it's entirely possible that it's going tip to tip. Which is something we really want to listen for. And again, the best way I think to get them to not do that is to think about their tongue underneath the reed in that kind of motion is a great way to think about it. Hopefully with those two suggestions for how to fix really common articulation problems, you can avoid those for your students.